Islamic banking is one of the world's fastest growing financial sectors and has attracted increased attention in the wake of the global financial crisis. Globally, the Sharia banking market's reckoned to be worth around £800 billion and is expected to maintain a growth rate of between 15 and 20% annually. Well, for more, we're joined by Paul Johns, Vice President at Complanet. Paul, why don't you start by telling us what kind of interest your business has in being involved in Islamic banking? Why are you involved there?
So Complanet provides a new service, and one of the things that we found interesting, we're running a conference actually in Doha next week, is just some of the principles that are kind of in place and just embedded in the Sharia banking law, and how some of those could be applied to Western models potentially. We're doing a lot of work, Complanet doing a lot of work with some very large firms out in the US, for example, and one of the principles in Sharia law is the need to have a line of sight through to the underlying assets. And we're seeing a lot of regulators now begin to question, some of the obscurity around the products that were sold. I mean, subprime is a classic example where there was really little understanding of the underlying asset that was being traded. And so a need to kind of risk map all of the products that are taken to market. So in the absence of some of the ethical, moral code, some kind of way to link those underlying assets, how you take those to market, and how you measure the risks associated with them.
But there are risks with any system, aren't there? I mean, if Western investors are looking to this alternative model, where do the risks there lie?
Well, I think you're absolutely right, and it's all about understanding the risk, though, and I think that's one of the concerns, is that, again, under Sharia, and by the way, we're not saying that Sharia law is the be-all and end-all, if you will. So there's a need, and this is one of the things we'll be debating at the GCC conference in Doha next week, there's a need, though, to kind of find some common ground. And one of the things that we find fascinating is that there's a shared responsibility that you just don't get necessarily in the West. So really, yes, there are risks, but they're better understood. I think, whilst there's some complexity around the products, it's the way that the firm and the client kind of share that risk and share that responsibility that I think, some would argue, is missing potentially from the Western banking models.
Line of sight is obviously a pretty good principle to live by, isn't it, when it comes to these sort of transactions? Right. But how far do you think that the Sharia law can be anti-innovation in the financial system? And is innovation a good or a bad thing?
Yeah, it's interesting you mention that, because when I first started looking into it, I thought, well, surely there will be issues around how complex could those offerings be, whether it's the bond market, the insurance market. But there are ways to apply the principles of Sharia actually to some fairly complex offerings. Look, I think it's fair to say, though, that there are areas of compromise. There is controversy around this point in terms of, well, the more innovative the product, perhaps the greater the return that you want, the less you will hold on to those Sharia principles. But again, it's the fundamentals of it that we find fascinating at Complanet. And again, some of those things that we're missing, and what we're seeing now as firms kind of reconstitute as banking holding companies, is this need to kind of understand the risk taken against all of those products, no matter how complex they are, and understand the risk that against those particular assets that, again, we just think's been missing. And again, I kind of come back to subprime. If you look at that, I think that's just a classic case of where the underlying assets were just so obscured. But I do take your point about the complexity of the products.
So if Volcker is currently undergoing loads of reforms in the world, and there's lots of good ideas for the future, what would be your best idea for the Western banking system?
What would be my best idea?
From this Sharia background that you know so much about.
Well, look, this is one of the reasons why we're sitting down at the GCC conference. I mean, so the reason why we're sitting down with Western banking firms and out, talking to firms out in Dubai, is to start debating these types of topics. Again, there's a lot that needs to be thought about. Again, I take your point about the complexity of the products, the fact that at the end of the day there is inherent risk in any financial market. But we just think that there's a need to kind of bring the East and West together.
I mean, the interesting thing is that the Dubai debt crisis has really homed in on some of the downsides for Sharia law, because a sukuk, right, is not the same as a Western-style bond in case of a bankruptcy or a default. And I think, and how people are going to deal with that particular issue.
Right, and again, look, so Complanet operates more on the risk and compliance side, right? So from our point of view, again, I keep on coming back to the GCC conference. These are the things that are being debated right now at the GCC conference in Doha next week.
Okay, you just got to know what you're dealing with, right?
Right, that's exactly right.
Yeah. Okay, Paul, good to see you. Thanks very much for joining us. Paul Johns, Vice President at Complanet.